And this is something we do for all of these calls. So welcome to the Singularity CE community meeting for June. We're delayed 1 week from our usual slot due to some participation in the Isc Hpc Containers Workshop last week, which we'll talk about a bit later. If you're new, we usually meet on the first Thursday of the month at this time. So when we get to July, it's going to be the first Thursday in July that we meet. So we're going to kick off to begin with a demo portion. Mike Frisch is going to take the screen to share, and he's going to show an addition to remote build support that's brought in by Singularity CE 3.10, but more than that, changes in the Sylabs cloud and so on. So I'll hand over to Mike for the demo, and then we'll go on talking about the ISC workshop and CE release and development updates.
Okay, can everybody see my screen?
I can see it.
Perfect, good. Okay, so this is just basically a quick demo of the remote build files support. So if you're accustomed to building Singularity containers in a privileged environment, and you're able to use %files in your def file, now we've projected this capability onto the remote builder functionality in cloud.sylabs.io and our Singularity Enterprise products. So no special command line arguments are required, or other user actions are required. If you have a %files section in your def file, it'll also be used for remote builds as well as how it is used currently with local builds. I just recommend anybody that wants to check this feature out to go and check out the Singularity documentation. There are some capabilities there that may not be as forward or clear, like path globbing and basically the format of the %files section. The support is enabled in SCS build. So in the previous calls, we've had discussion of SCS build, and that's our CI/CD tool for building SIF files from a workflow where you wouldn't typically install Singularity. As well, the capabilities included in Singularity CE 3.10 and newer, and it will be also included in an upcoming Singularity Pro 3.9 patch release. So I'm going to jump right into the demo here and just give you an overview of how things are going with SCS build. The only key thing here that is affected or affects the SCS build invocation is the fact that you kind of got to manipulate paths with Docker. So you need to effectively bind in any directories that are required or that contain files into the container using the same path as they are on the local host, because otherwise it won't know where those files are. It's expecting them to be in a certain path, and then within the container, it's not that same path. So you can see from in a second, I'll show you the Docker run invocation so you can just see what I'm referring to. But in the meantime, let's have a look at the def file. It's a very simple Alpine Bootstrap def file. You can see that I have 3 entries in my files sections. The first one is a fully qualified path that is also the current working directory, but that's only coincidence. The second file is a file dropped into the root file system of the image. And the third is obviously dropped into a new directory. So it's creating a path within the image, and that file 3.txt will be contained in that path. So I'm just going to copy and paste my Docker invocation here. And let me just stop this before. So you can see what I was referring to. In particular, workdir, you have to set that so the current working directory inside the SCS build container is the same as what you see on the host. I've already set my auth token in the environment, as you can see here. And then this is the mapping of the volume, the current directory, into the SCS build container. I'm running that as my current user so that there's no permissions issues. Next command is next line is just the invocation of the container with the build subcommand. Skip verify because I don't have SSL publicly signed SSL certificates referencing the def file in the current directory. So again, as I mentioned, we're mapping in the current directory with the volume argument, setting the current directory within the container to that volume, and then referencing the alpine.def, which is in the current directory, to there. And then the library reference here, same as always, whether you're using files or not. You can see in the output of the build, it says extracting build context files, and then file extraction successful. And then you can see the standard Singularity output here. As you can see, it did find those files, so the build context support is working. When you don't specify a destination for the file, it gets dropped into the root of the image. And as you can see, based on the remnants of the def file at the top of the screen, these files went into the places where they were expected to be in. So I'll just Singularity exec that just to confirm that, so you don't have to take my word for it. So there you go. There's the files, the timestamp and everything. It's all just a freshly built CIF file. The same thing applies to multi-stage definition files, though, and this applies to locally built containers as well as those built in the remote builder. You have to kind of pay attention to the from stage name modifier here. So there's a little bit of trickery, obviously. In this case, the first stage is generating this file here, and then the second stage, the final stage, is actually referring to that generated file and copying it into the file system. So what you do in this case is have a secondary %file section, and that way you can pull in arbitrary files from the file system. And just to show that there's no trickery there, I'm just going to go run and do another build. Same deal, you see the output of the extracted build context, and should be. There you go. So the builds is completed there, multi-stage as well. I won't run the exec here because same thing applies. So that's all well and good if you're using SCS build, but as I mentioned previously, the support's also included in Singularity CE 3.10. So I just built this binary yesterday from the main branch, and I've already set up the build environment, the build remote, using my local Singularity Enterprise install. So I'm just going to go and run a build there using the same def file. Everything seems to apply here as it does in SCS build. The exact same code is basically used for the output here. So you should see the exact same output in the when you're using Singularity. And the same goes for the multi-stage builds. And that's pretty much it. Like I said, all the semantics that apply for the %file section when building locally apply to remote builds. So if you check out the Singularity documentation, it'll give you all those details there. We welcome anybody to give it a try, and we'll be happily support that available on support will happily be available on the Slack channel if everybody runs into a problem. But we're anxious to hear feedback on this and see how people are using it. I will mention that it is enabled live on cloud.sylabs.io right now. So if you're using a newer build, like I mentioned, the Singularity 3.10, you can go ahead and use that. And SCS build obviously is available from Docker Hub under scilabs.io/scs-build. And it is also enabled for build contexts. Love to hear any questions if you have any. Otherwise, I'll pass it over to DT.
Any questions? Okay, thanks, Mike.
I had a question.
Go ahead.
Okay, hey, thanks. Yeah, I had A question about making reference to the local file system and the new feature. I'd always been a bit confused over the use of environment variables. So one of the tricks has been in the def file, being able to leverage the environment from the build host. One design pattern we've tried in the past is a two-pass approach where we'll put environment variables in the def and then use sed or something to replace them to build another def that's got absolute paths to work around the problem. But certainly for this use case, I could see that being even more interesting, where somebody would want an environment variable or a tilde or whatnot to make reference to the local path. I mean, do you have any comment on that, or does that use of sed seem crazy to work around not having those?
I think the use of sed makes sense here. If I'm not mistaken, the tilde doesn't work in the %files section. So you'd have to specify either a fully qualified path or just not have any qualifier at all, and then it's just assumed to be in the local directory. If you want to discuss this or you try it out and run into problems, please hit me up on Slack. But it sounds interesting. I guess if your build environment is changing such that you need to do the sed replacement every time based on like a user directory or something like that, then there's probably nothing here that helps you. But like I said, fully qualified paths will just work as is. And as long as you invoke like if you're using SCS build, if you invoke that with the proper mapping into the container. But otherwise, Singularity should just pick them up the way you've been working already.
Okay, hey, thanks for the answer. That makes perfect sense. Yeah, just to make it sort of concrete, we definitely did find that the tilde did not, didn't work either. And in a lot of cases, they might be something like PBS environment variables, where if we're doing a build somewhere on a build server, those were the tricky dynamics. So it was just a gotcha, and it might be an opportunity really more for the documentation than anything else. And the sed thing, once we thought of it, worked out quite well. It just it took a moment to get to that aha and realize it was rather a simple workaround.
Yeah,
but thanks.
And then it adds that extra step, which would be nice to eliminate. Please, if you've got the time, get on Slack, the community Slack, and if you want to talk about it and perhaps improve the workflow, we'd be happy to do so.
Yeah, it'd be great to have an example of what you're doing if you can. Like Mike said, you can chat on Slack, or there's the mailing list. Otherwise, also the docs repository is open source on GitHub as well. So if you ever think of things which you could kind of slot in there, please do go ahead and open an issue or a PR if you fancy. Okay. Any other questions? All right, thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next thing to talk about is the Isc Hpc Containers Workshop. So I was lucky enough to attend this remotely. I got up at 1:30 in the morning here in Dallas and spent the day dialed into Germany. So for those of you who haven't come across it before, this is a workshop which is organized by Christian and takes place annually at ISC. And this year, the agenda was kind of organized into blocks covering different container runtimes used in HPC, considerations for building containers, and then the distribution of containers and the orchestration and scheduling of containers. So we were lucky enough to be invited to give an update on the state of Singularity in the runtime section. So if you want to, I'll drop the link in various places, but you can find the short kind of lightning talk slides. And this was really covering the state of Singularity CE 3.10, which was released during May, and we'll talk about in a bit, and also covering where we're going next with 3.11 and looking out to 4.0, which is really something we've kind of talked about quite a lot in the past few meetings. And if you've not heard the discussion there, you might be interested in the link, which is here, which kind of takes you out to a post, which is really a summary of you know, the approach that we're taking going forward out to CE 4.0 and beyond. So that was the kind of 5 minutes on the state of Singularity. Other people in that section talked about Podman. Interestingly, Podman will now handle running basic SIF images, though not necessarily always exactly in the same way that Singularity would. Also heard from the Saris runtime. And there was some good discussion there around the topic of improving OCI support and really looking at leveraging runC and the other kind of low-level container runtime components, which is the approach we're taking going forward, and is the approach of Saris and Podman in slightly different ways. The build section had a kind of a nice exploration of best practices, you know, build tools available, and then some runtime specific things. So Charlie Cloud, which is an unprivileged container runtime developed at Los Alamos, has an interesting build approach now based on using Git to kind of track steps in a build, but not in the same way Docker does with having layers which have to get assembled. So that was quite an interesting talk to see how they did that. Doesn't look like the slides are up for that one, but can go back to that. We had an opportunity to talk about the Singularity image format. So that was really giving an overview, which is the type of stuff which is in all our documentation now, but also the roadmap. So the experimental ability to mount using Fuse in 3.10 and how we're going to extend that through 3.11. And then looking out to encapsulating OCI images in a SIF file rather than translating them to Singularity format. We also touched a bit on some of the collaboration going on around SIF. So we mentioned in this meeting a few times that Sylabs are reaching out to Anchor, and we're working to get the ability to scan SIF images into their open source SIFT product, which creates a software bill of materials you can then use for audit and vulnerability analysis. And the other point I alluded to before was that basic support for SIF got into the Red Hat containers image library. Adam Hughes at Sylabs gave a little bit of assistance there, and that's now consumed by Podman and many other projects. So you might have seen things about Podman starting to support running SIF. The only kind of caution I'd have there is that this is a fairly basic translation at the moment from a SIF file into something in OCI format that Podman can run, and you won't have the same kind of default environment, handling of environment in the container and so on that Singularity does. So you might find that things don't run entirely the same if you try that out. Later on, the distribution and the orchestration and scheduling one, these were really kind of less directly relevant to Singularity CE as a project, but it was interesting to hear some updates on CVMFS, and then a bunch of talk actually and discussion arose around how we distribute images for different microarchitectures or different accelerators and things, so that people get the right container image for the system they're going to run on, and the challenges involved in that. In the orchestration scheduling section, as you might expect, there was discussion on kind of Kubernetes and so on, but also a bit of a step back from that to looking at what researchers are interested in, which is running workflows rather than kind of deploying containers, and how we deal with that more as clusters look to kind of adopt some of the practices in the Kubernetes world, or become hybrid places where you can kind of do traditional HPC and more cloud native work. So this was a really great session, and finished up with a bunch of stuff about PMI, MPI and stuff, kind of really diving into it. I'd recommend that if you're kind of in this area and interested, look out for the one next year, because it's well worth attending. Are there any, I don't know, are there any questions at all about the kind of stuff I flicked through there, or we'll move on?
You know if they're going to have a recording of the sessions? Video
I don't know, Dave. You have to pay to attend the workshops, right? You have to register, so I'm not sure whether that precludes the recording going out or not. Are you aware of the HPC Containers Slack workspace?
Yeah, I think so.
Christian is in there if you want to ask him or reach out. There's an HPCW at ISC channel in there too, so you could probably ask there. For the Singularity side, I actually ended up preparing videos of the lightning talks, as did Josh Hersey at IBM, and I'm going to, at least for our bits, confirm with Christian it's okay to post those. I can't say at the moment whether the entire sessions recordings are going to be posted. Okay, so jumping back in time then to pre-ISC, the Singularity CE 3.10.0 release came out 23 days ago now. So middle of May, we hit the kind of planned schedule for the release. And this one brought several new features. The kind of most significant thing really for users is probably going to be some improvements to OCI compatibility and our -- compat mode. So this is kind of buried down at the bottom of the list here. But let me explain this again. So Singularity has always handled arguments when you run a container and environment variables through scripting. In Singularity 2.x, a lot of stuff was written in Bash and Python and C, all kind of like joined together. And Singularity 3 used the same kind of action script approach, environment script approach to kind of drive the initial execution in the container. Now, the way that this was done in a backward compatible manner meant that environment variables and arguments you pass to a container weren't always handled exactly the same as if you did the same thing with Docker, because there was a step of evaluation in this shell-driven process. So there's now a flag called no eval, which is also implied by this compat mode, and this will kind of change the behavior of Singularity, so it doesn't do that step of evaluation, and it handles the arguments you pass and environment variables like Docker and other OCI runtimes do. So this is something which is probably of interest to people who are running complicated Docker containers and trying to pass long arguments and things like that. Previously, you had to work out how to escape these things properly just for Singularity. now you can turn on this flag instead. There's a bunch of stuff around the Singularity OCI command here, and this really probably won't affect many people directly. The Singularity OCI command is there so that Singularity can work like an OCI runtime with the same container lifecycle and using the same JSON configuration file as other OCI runtimes do. People don't tend to use this directly with Singularity. It was primarily added there for some sort of experimental support of interfaces with other orchestrators and things, which wasn't pursued. But we are now using this as the jumping off point for our long-term roadmap, which will start to use low-level OCI tooling more to run containers in a compatible way. So all of this kind of stuff in the list is just kind of really the first steps towards that. We come down a bit more. There's some updated support for Setcomp, which is system call filtering. And significantly, we now support native C groups resource limits in their native format, and you can apply them as a non-root user if you're running a distribution that is using C groups v2 and you have the systemd C groups manager. So you've got flags now where you can limit the amount of CPU, block IO, memory, or process IDs a container can use directly on the Singularity command line. So that's an exciting one. If you are running into issues where you want to run multiple containers in a single batch job but limit their relative resources, or you're developing something on a laptop and you want to limit the memory usage or the CPU usage so it doesn't clobber all your browser sessions and whatever, this is useful there. Not going to go through the entire rest of the release notes, but they're there if you want them. So far, it's been fairly quiet in terms of bug reports, but we will address any that come in, and obviously there'll be patch releases over the next 6 months before 3.11 happens, hopefully in the middle of November. Okay, any questions about CE 3.10? Okay, so really now development focus is going to move on to 3.11, which I said is November. And this is where we're really trying to accelerate our work on supporting running OCI containers more compatibly using the low-level OCI tooling as a step towards 4.0. These are on the roadmap, the primary kind of big blocks of stuff we're going to be tackling. If you want to read through those, bug fix stuff will be handled and backported. And I want to point out that we've got a contribution already for 3.11 from Vanessa, who's been involved in Singularity development a lot in the past. So Vanessa has written initial code to support monitoring the resource usage of instances. So now we've got a better C group support. We can pull out stats on how much RAM and CPU containers are using. So the first step of that is a simple kind of monitoring for instances, and that's going to be expanded out, but the initial work was already merged by Vanessa. Okay, any questions on the kind of development stuff? Okay then, I mean, that's really the update we have for this month. Open the floor if anyone's got any questions on any kind of Singularity topic. We can have a chat about those, or we can hand you back half an hour. Anything anyone wants to bring up? All right then. Thanks for joining us. I want to point out that next month we'll have a demo of a project which is kind of associated with Singularity. So this is the Singularity Hpc project. It's something led by Vanessa, who I mentioned has been active in the community for a long time. And it's centered on using Singularity to run containers of applications, but kind of wrapping that up within the common module system, which is in use on HPC, and making that easy to do. So if you're interested in that, there'll be a demo from Vanessa next month. And remember that we're on the first Thursday next month, but at the same time. Thanks for coming along, and pop into the Slack or mailing list if you have any questions.
Thanks, DT.